And the fence is only 5 foot high. All he's got to do is look over the fence and he would have seen Chapman with her killer, with the Ripper.
In these extraordinarily difficult cases where a roaming sexual killer attacks people he doesn't know, so you can't follow up people's associates. If he attacks prostitutes, he's attacking women who automatically go off to dark corners with half a dozen strange men every day. How on earth are you going to find which one is doing the killing?
I think by Victorian standards, the investigation into the series of Whitechapel murders was conducted as well as possibly they could manage in those days. They put extra manpower on the streets. They had intensive door-to-door inquiries. All leads were followed up, even ridiculous leads.
Prostitutes described a local man who had been threatening them.
Well, he's short and he's stocky and he's got the blackest hair and a black moustache and the thickest neck you ever saw. He's got a cap and like a leather apron and he waves his knife about and he shouts, "I'll rip you up!"
When the Ripper murders began, the Metropolitan Police, they rapidly announced that although they couldn't name him, they didn't even know his name, their principal suspect was a local poor Polish-Jewish immigrant, nicknamed Leather Apron.
Scotland Yard quickly arrested John Pizer as Leather Apron in order to stop the press from printing inflammatory articles about an immigrant man threatening London women. There was no evidence implicating Pizer in the murders, and he was quickly released. But the incident fed ethnic tensions in the East End.
The Irish were resented by the native English. The Irish themselves resented the new influx of Jewish immigrants who settled particularly in the parish of Whitechapel, because that was where the ancient two synagogues of London had always been, and they were racing in, fleeing the pogroms of Russia and Bismarck's clearances of Jews in Silesia.
Onto that Jewish community is projected the idea that it's a Jew that is the Ripper, the murderer, because no Englishman, no East Ender would actually have committed such a crime. So the Jews are already becoming, the immigrant Jew is becoming the scapegoat and the suspect for the Ripper murders.
The police next turned their sights on doctors who performed amputations and surgery. Perhaps the killer who extracted organs from his victims was a doctor.
It is apparently an amputation knife, a late 19th century amputation knife. And certainly it's the sort of weapon which could have done the murders.
A number of medical students whose brains had been unhinged were being sought after. And in fact there was a time when to be a doctor and to carry a bag around made you an enormously suspicious person.
The idea that the Ripper was a doctor came from one and one only of the medics who examined the bodies. Dr. Baxter Phillips, after examining Annie Chapman's body, said this was the work of an expert.
The abdomen had been entirely laid open. The intestines, severed from their mesenteric attachments, had been lifted out of the body and placed on the shoulder of the corpse, whilst the pelvis, the uterus, and its appendages had been entirely removed. Obviously the work of an expert, of one at least who had such knowledge of anatomical examinations as to be enabled to secure the pelvic organs with one sweep of the knife.
The people at the top had the medical evidence surveyed by Dr. Bond of Westminster, a police surgeon they trusted implicitly, and Bond's full report on all the medical evidence in the case said no skill at all, not even the skill of a butcher.
After two ghastly murders, many concerned citizens wrote letters to Scotland Yard suggesting ways to catch the murderer. The most popular idea was to have armed police pose as prostitutes. Then, on September 29, a note arrived, purportedly from the killer himself. The signature was brilliant.
Dear boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. That joke about the leather apron gave me real fits. I'm down on oars and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled.
Scotland Yard was now very fearful that the mysterious Whitechapel fiend would soon strike again.
My knife's so nice and sharp, I want to get to work right away if I get the chance. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper.
The name, Jack the Ripper, probably invented by a journalist, certainly first appearing in the Dear Boss letter. But what a name for an undiscovered ghoul.
Charles Warren, head of Scotland Yard, was under siege. The killer was still at large. His superiors were furious, and the public had no confidence in him. The radical press wanted him out. 1 square mile in the centre of London had its own police force. The City of London Police and its Commissioner, Major Henry Smith, were about to be drawn into the hunt for Jack the Ripper.
Extra reinforcements were put into the area. And also, it seems silly now, although I'm sure the intention was well meant, notice was given out advising the prostitutes to stay off the street.
24 hours later, the worst fears of the police were realized.
The first victim that night was Elizabeth Stride, nicknamed Long Liz. She had been seen hustling for trade up and down a little road called Berners Street in the East End during the evening from 11 p.m. Her body was found at about 1 o'clock in Dutfield's Yard, a little opening off Berners Street. Her throat had been cut, but she'd not been mutilated, and it is thought that the Ripper may have been frightened off by hearing Deemschutz's pony and trap approaching.
Murder slipped out from behind the gateway, headed west, and crossed the invisible boundary. We're not, no big wall or ditch to jump. It's just crossing from one side of the street to the other. Crosses from Scotland Yard territory into the city. It is there, then, he picks up the second prostitute on that night, a prostitute called Catherine Eddowes.
Night, old cock.
The second murder on the night of the double murders was that of Catherine Eddowes. Her body was found at about 1:45 in Mitre Square in the City of London. She had been appallingly mutilated, her throat cut, V's cut in her cheeks pointing up to the eyes, her eyelids nicked through, the tip of her nose cut off, and the usual ripping and abdominal mutilation, with her uterus and 1 kidney taken away by the murder.
Now, nobody has seen or heard a thing. Not the policeman on the beat, the policeman and his family, in the house opposite, the night porter with the door partly open. They didn't actually have to see the square or be present on it, because Mitre Square had an echo on it. He's now killed once on Scotland Yard territory, Metropolitan Police territory. He's now killed once on City of London Police territory. So you've got search parties coming from both directions looking for him. And he's in between. I mean, he's very confident, he's very arrogant.
Commissioner Smith of the London Police immediately assigned men to the case. He was not about to be criticised as incompetent and hopeless as press cartoons portrayed his counterpart, Sir Charles Warren. At the same time, 4,500 East End women who were concerned about brothels and raucous taverns in Whitechapel signed an impassioned letter to the Queen.
Madam, we the women of East